Hello everyone, very much welcome to this PCB skills webinar. It will be recorded also, and you can check the videos afterwards on request. What we will be focusing on is a bit of an introduction also to the PCB conference, as this will be very likely also a very hot topic at this year in managing artificial intelligence. And this is a bit of an introduction. There will be more some interesting sessions on the conference. So have a look at the conference website certainly later on, and there is a lot of interesting things that is going to be published. Also, you will notice later on my LinkedIn profile, there will be a page with the questions and answers, and depending a bit on the time we have today, I will take a few questions, and if there's more the questions than I can take or answer within the sessions, we will make sure that any of the questions that is posted in the chat will getting an answer actually to the posting. So feel free to use the chat or the chat window to post your questions, and I will make sure that we will get into that one later on. Right. First of all, last week actually I was auditing a customer, and typically I'm doing a lot of ISO 27001 audits, and I was quite surprised, and certainly for the last year that customers get more and more questions, so it was quite welcome to host these sessions, actually combining the cybersecurity or information security with AI. What we will walk through a bit is, first of all, do a bit of an introduction on artificial intelligence and the link to the information security and cybersecurity, and then we will dive a bit more into details for what exactly is the situation right now, and how you should cope with AI from an enterprise perspective. And we will also discuss a bit on how AI now is impacting the cybersecurity frameworks. We will discuss a bit of the best practices, also the impact on legislation. So I hope at least from the slide decks and from information you get some useful information. And then of course we will host the main topic of today is how can you actually get ready for it, and we will use AI obviously also to discuss a bit the current in-demand skills. Please be aware that as I will show you, and you all know, AI is moving very fast, so it will be a bit of hints and tips, but in essence in the next part, in the next module, we'll also give some hints and tips actually what you can do to get up to speed depending on the situation where you're in, and some practical hints and tips, and also referring very likely to the PCB skills sessions. And there's a lot of interesting material, but using that as a foundation, you can build your career, and we will walk a few items actually to do so. If you want to know more about it, you can quickly check LinkedIn and find the right Peter Gelen actually on the LinkedIn website. Please be aware that you match the hat, because I have a few of colleagues actually in the Benelux, in Belgium and Netherlands over here that have the same name, but make sure that you match with the PCB trainer that is presenting for you today. So always welcome to Build Network. And hopefully I will see you also next week in the PCB conference in Barcelona this year. And anyway, you will also see some publications. This session will be recorded. You might see some also on my linked page, some reference to the websites, and I will also make sure that all the reference links, mentioned platforms we talk about, useful content will be hosted on the web page and LinkedIn, so you can always revert back, use the links if you think it's handy to do so. So let's get started a bit. As I mentioned last week, there was quite some news, and I initially found out that the link actually, or the reference to it, was actually the Gartner diagram. Although I mentioned, and I thought actually it was published in 2023, what you see over here is a bit of the hype diagram. You have the hype cycle typically used for emerging platforms, emerging technologies, and One of the news we got on also last week, and it was also a subject to discussion with a customer, is that actually we are over the top of the first hype actually of artificial intelligence, and the customer was wondering, yeah, what's the situation right now? How should I cope with AI? Remember that we were discussing actually implementing ISO 27001, which is quite an interesting method actually to handle and to manage artificial intelligence, which I will explain also in the next few slides. But yeah, he was wondering, yeah, how about the status of AI? What's the impact of it? Should he be worried about it? And then I found out actually just afterwards that there is an update of the hype cycle also by Gartner, and you see nowadays that we're looking into a more advanced agentic AI, for example, the last few weeks, lots of talk about it. So even knowing that since the last few years, the modern artificial intelligence is only ramping up, the modern technology, the way of working, using cloud, using big data, actually is ramping up very quickly, and yeah, this confuses people. So I hope at least that with this session you can get some guidance how to cope with it and prepare yourself actually for the next wave. Yeah, be prepared actually for a bit of a dip, and that exactly was mentioned in the news. After the hype, people get a bit of disappointed actually in AI. They expect a lot of features and rich experiences for AI. So it has been, yeah, boosting a lot the last few years, and now actually a bit of cool down comes up, and yeah, you get ready for a stable implementations of AI for the next few years. You will see this actually hype is also, for example, quite similar to what we discussed or what we saw actually in the past with cloud security and cloud implementations. It's pretty stable. On the other hand, I think that we can expect that AI will be there, will stay there, and will be one of the platforms actually that will change our lives. Anyway, it will need to be stabilized. It needs to get robust. Lots of companies have invested actually in AI to build the platforms to go for the next level in many cases. And I'm just curious what is happening. One of the reasons of a bit of a disappointment in many cases was actually the risk, and we saw already a few attacks, a few data leaks, and that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you actually in this session. What are the potential emerging risks, and how should you cope with it, at least from the level of information and cybersecurity? One of the typical things, and that is exactly what is being referred to also in the hype cycle, is the speed of AI. So if you look at the cloud adoption, for example, it took quite a while. It was actually moving at the typical classical data center approach into a hosted approach. While you see the speed of adoption of AI is many times faster, and one of the disadvantages is that frameworks and best practices framework cannot keep up in that sense. Although that you might see that we have new standards, we will discuss a bit in detail the 42000, for example, but also the NIST, for example, the risk management framework. It's going so fast actually that new features come up that actually frameworks cannot keep up. It needs to be updated. It takes time. Lots of cooperations with experts is required, and that's even worse for legislation. Typically, depending on the abuse or depending on the evolution actually of technology, legislation will follow up later on. And one of the things I will discuss later on also with you in one of the next slides is how legislation is keeping up with AI, and there's not a lot of things to discover in that sense. So very likely, globally speaking, there will be lots of discussions also from a legal perspective, and in that case, also political situations might impact, for example, the adoptions of frameworks and legislations in that case. Another point here, very important and certainly relevant also to cybersecurity and information security, is the rise of AI malware. It's using logarithms, it's using also trend analysis. The large language models actually help you actually to create very smart messages and so on. So you see that also the use of these engines used also built on cloud solutions in most of the cases become very powerful also in malware. So even the dark side where cybercrime is trying to get into your situation, try to steal your data, is using AI, and that concerns a lot of people. So how to cope with that one is one of the major questions for lots of enterprises. One of the other things which is not always very visible to companies is called shadow IT. And what are we actually looking at in shadow IT is that many users get interested in using any kind of AI platforms, applications, integrations, for example, with Office or your laptop, or even writing documents or doing presentations for you. And lots of the users can actually start or install the applications if they have the permission to do so, which is the case for many companies. They start to buy the application, to try to test applications. So in many cases, actually, they start using AI before even the internal IT department is ready to distribute or to install the applications. And in worst case scenario, users are not happy with the blockage or with the use of the proposed AI solutions or the platforms by the IT department, and then they buy the license or the software. And it's extremely easy nowadays and to surf to the internet, to use ChatGPT, Perplexity, any AI platform, even creating drawings, or even nowadays creating music actually using AI, while it's very difficult actually for the enterprise and for the company to control which data actually is being used by these AI platforms. And you can test a few things, check a few things on the internet, but how are we going to block this? Anyway, if you're going into blocking mode, you might get frustrated end users, for example. So you need to think about it. We will cope with this also in the discussion about the skills you will probably need actually to manage your AI environment. Another very important part, and then we're actually pointing out actually to the data protection, is that the data proliferation, meaning that the distribution of your data and sending the data, for example, to cloud platforms, search engines, whatever, entering chats, for example. Nowadays, for example, this week, there's again some news that, for example, Meta is going to use the chats and the queries that you send to the Meta AI, for example, will be used for marketing, for example. Last week there was an announcement with an update of LinkedIn, for example, where they will be using actually the interactions or the data that you have actually to learn or actually to host the data in AI. So there's a lot of confusion in that case. Do you want to do this, and do you want actually the data to be used? In many cases, you're not sure that if you're using AI, any platform actually where actually is data sitting. In contradiction to many the classical cloud solutions, for example, it's usually very difficult actually to destroy the data or get the data out of the language models or the AI systems, because actually they need actually that data to get smarter, to propose solutions you need in many cases. But not a lot of people think about, hey, where is my data? Can I get rid of it? Can I block it? So this is also one of the considerations that you should do if you're planning for updating your skills or learning mechanisms, for example. So the combination of AI, data protection, and information security is becoming increasingly more important. In many cases also, people forget that AI is a system like any other system, and there are a few things you should consider. So also from the learning skills point of view, you should not only think about technology, but also how to protect your data, how to protect people, how to handle the platforms, learning skills, language models, for example. How to interact with the systems if you design, for example, an AI system, if you create bots, for example, that want to interact with your customers. Also, the human part is extremely important. So you might consider also to increase, for example, your communication skills or the human interaction to increase actually the performance of your applications. And of course, very important, yeah, you need to have the processes, how to consume data, how to collect data, how to build a system. So it's quite important to combine actually the situations and that they have the proper process in place, including data exploration, data destruction, communications about the privacy, for example. So there's a lot of things you need to think about. We will cover this one also in the skills you probably need to manage the AI. Also very important, politics. We see right now with the situations, it can change rapidly with the nomination of a president or for example, elections or for example, the situation even with the wars. So you see that AI is largely influenced, and the use of AI is largely influenced actually even with the international or the global political situations. So it might be very interesting also to be aware of that one and to know your context and the potential threats. And you can imagine, for example, as we see also in warfare, for example, that in many cases, for example, nowadays digital war starts first before actually the physical war or any situation actually will happen. So that's very important to consider if you talk about AI and AI risk management, for example. Next to the impact or the features of AI, there's another part actually that you should be very much aware of, and this is also a classic and on the level of education and training. Be aware of data protection, and data protection in the broadest sense, not only from a GDPR perspective, for example, or privacy perspective, but how do you want to protect your company data? How do you want to make sure that your data of the company is not leaked, for example, to the internet, and that you can retrieve or block or delete company data once it's not used anymore, or if the data is expired, or even a worst case scenario where an employee or staff member, for example, accidentally has entered some data. Remember, for example, the Samsung case in AI. So also privacy, as many tools nowadays, even cars or systems, laptops, devices, smartwatches, and so on, are now more and more AI enabled. Run applications actually on the devices becomes very powerful in many cases. So it's quite important also to think about privacy. Please remember that in many regions, data protection privacy is pretty much the same. But for example, in Europe, data protection is really about protecting your data and the attributes and your information that you have, while privacy is rather about the right to be left alone, camera, for example. But with the tracking of GPS, for example, it's becoming very difficult, and many cases AI will use that data to provide your services in many cases. And of course, information security. How are you going to protect information if you use platforms or build platforms? Where is the data? How are you going to secure it? Can you make sure that you even remove the data in many cases if the data expires? What about communications? The guarantee also to your staff, for example, that the data is not being used. How to make sure that your users or your staff or your customers know how use your AI platforms, for example. So you need to communicate, to train them, and also make sure what is the fair use actually of this AI technology. And last but not least, I mentioned already, also used for malware, also building the platforms securely. So development skills is even more and more important. Making sure that the logic and the way that your AI applications work and behave properly. So testing these applications, making sure actually that they work correctly is quite important in that case. So yeah, it's a major focus and to keep your platform secure. And last, and certainly as we see also in the initial part of the launch of AI, making sure that your platforms are trustworthy. You remember, for example, if in the initial cases, if you ask some questions, for example, to ChatGPT in the initial versions, it was quite easy to make, for example, AI and large language modules to make them hallucinate. So it's quite important to think about it, consider it, even if you control applications and AI in that sense yourself. So please be careful. A consideration also in the skills. We'll come back to that one later. On top of that layer, both on the technical side as on the implementation side, it's quite important also to think about governance. We will discuss in a minute also, for example, the ISO governance, ISO 42000, for example, which is one of the examples. There are some other reference standards also for the NIST. You can quickly check. I will reference in these presentations later on. But also ethical considerations. It's not because it's legal actually that you are allowed to do something that is ethical to do so. Can I use data, for example? Can I use staff data, personal data, location data, GPS, and so on, for example, handling the data, yes or no? So it's quite important, and certainly for AI, to also consider ethical considerations. What is allowed? What do you want to vouch for or not? One different big thing with AI is, of course, human interaction. That's slightly different as what we have seen in the past wave of cloud, for example. Nowadays, interacting with people, the large language model, chatting with them, using bots, for example, makes it very personal in many cases. So you need to also behave. You need to also make sure that you can evaluate how people are interacting with your platform, and also take care that you cope with bad behavior or typical human behavior in, for example, ranting or people not happy with the situation. So considering then human interaction is an extremely important view actually on AI. In most of the situations, AI only works very well if you have proper data quality in the systems, but by default, using human data, using internet data, using platform data, and nowadays it's not always clean. It's old archive data or data history data in many cases, and it's human, so it contains mistakes. It might not always be accurate. Or it might contain, for example, opinions or some of the bad things we might expect. So AI is acting with the data it has, and it might expose actually the exact human behavior as we all do, right? So it's quite important. Last but not least, also, how are you going to check this? And one of the options which will become over time more and more important is, of course, auditing. So how are you going to audit this? And one of the issues certainly with AI is that the data that is being stored in the AI systems is not structured, at least not the human way as we do it. It's a very smart system, but the structure, how decisions are made, is not always clear. There are no strict rules or no clear rules in many cases, and AI usually adopts themselves actually in case of changing data, changing the rules. It's very dynamic, and this poses quite some challenges, certainly on the auditing perspective. So how is AI then impacting the current security frameworks? First of all, there are quite some frameworks, but I will actually discuss the most well-known in these cases, and two major references to this one is actually ISO, International Standards Organizations, and NIST, where the NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which is the US governmental organization. And last but not least, the third one is OWASP, and this is a very important framework and best practice actually for developers. Please be aware there's a huge difference also between best practices and legal acts. Best practices actually help you do the good thing. You can choose actually what to implement. You choose what to scope and how it works, but there are no obligations in many cases. Of course, for example, there are some quite important choices to discuss, for example, how to use ISO or NIST, for example, and one of the major reasons, for example, if you want to have certifications, you probably will choose for the international standards by ISO, but the global standards. Why, for example, for the NIST standards, there is no accreditation or no certification mechanism. While it's still valid, and it's a very handy way actually to build governance actually for your AI in this case. Please be aware that there are also some legal acts. While you might see, and we'll discuss later on a bit in detail, it's still advancing, so there are no a huge volume of legal acts, and one of the well-known right now is the EU AI Act. So it's setting rules actually how to use AI in a legal and ethical way of working. And another one that has active legislations right now is CHAN, and that's virtually it. I'll make a bit of an overview in one of the next slides. If you're talking about frameworks and best practices, you see a bit of a list over here of the standards being used by ISO. One of the initial standards on the governance part actually is ISO 42001, so is AI, Artificial Intelligence Management System, AIMS, which is a discussion actually how you should implement best practice, how to control the environment. It's complemented with a bunch of standards, and what you might see in this case, certainly for the risk management and the AI audits at the 4205 for the risk management, and the 4206 is pretty similar actually to what is happening also with 27001, which is the information security standard. It's a bit complicated actually for the additional complementary standards to do so, because there the nomenclature or the names are not aligned actually with the 42000. It's 22989 for AI concepts and technology, which is pretty similar to ISO 27000 using the vocabulary, for example. And additionally to the AI standards, you also have the 38500-07, which is the governance standard. So what are the governance implications actually for AI? And two other interesting standards you might have a look at is the 24028 and the 23053, which is a trustworthiness, fair use actually of AI. And also one of the technical standards is a machine learning standard. So you see there's a package of information that might be an interesting hint if you want to dive into AI and know a bit more about general concepts and to discover these standards. I will publish the links actually on the LinkedIn page later this week, so you can have a look at. I added actually also a bit of an overview on the structure of the 2701, and you will see actually that the grouping and the way that the 42000 is working is pretty much the same as what 27001 does. So you can consider that the 42000 AI as a sort of twin sister, a twin brother actually with the 27000. So it might be quite interesting to combine both of them, and certainly if you have experience in the 27000, it's a fair easy entry to get through the 42000. So once you know a bit of information security, yeah, you can see similar principles actually also in the AI. I mentioned another one, which is, by the way, quite recently updated. Just have a look at the NIST AI risk management framework. It's a pretty same thing as you see also at the map, measure, manage, and govern principles. It's slightly different as what the ISO 27000 or the typical PDCA cycle does for ISO. But one major difference in the ISO standards versus the NIST documentation is very typically the NIST documentation is used governmental paid, and it's for free, but usually provides a lot of details and tools, for example, to manage, in this case, artificial intelligence. So have a look at it. You might find quite some interesting tools, and obviously also their framework is linked, for example, with also the CMFs. So the cybersecurity management framework and the cyber fundamentals, for example, in that case, is using it. So there's an interesting combination, both also on the ISO as for NIST, and to combine actually AI with basic principles actually of information security and cyber security. One specific thing that I certainly would suggest actually to have a look at it is also the OWASP Gen AI security project, which is a very nice overview, but rather from the view of application security, developing platforms, protecting the environment actually from an application perspective. And there is quite some interesting information into that one. Have a look at owasp.org, and then you can actually look at it. So even for technical guys, technical teams, there's quite some interesting things, and this perfectly matches also the implementation of our ISO 27001 information security project. Right. As I mentioned, also very important from a legal perspective, what I quickly want to show you over here is what is the current state of play and nowadays at early October 2025. So there is a bit of an evolution going on a few things, and In this case, for example, in 2024, there was an AI Act published in the EU, becoming active now, that will actually discuss how AI is mentioned. Well, in the US, there's an executive order, but there is very limited actually global or US level implementation of regulations, so it's rather limited right now. And also in China, there are some legislations actually to algorithm rules how AI can be used, but in the other countries and regions you will see very low number actually of legislation. There are some proposals, so the legislation is drafted, but right now you see that globally speaking there is a very low level actually on legislation to take. This will be quite a challenge, I think, that if AI is evolving, legislation is popping up. So if you are using or even building AI tools and mechanisms, you should be very aware, and I would highly suggest actually to put in a legal watch, that you can actually start tracking actually what is happening with the legal requirements in your region, or at least within the areas where you operate your business. So it's quite important to respect the rules, to avoid any penalties or fines actually about legislation. It will be quite a challenge, I think, also in the future, that we might get conflicting acts, or that certain regions are looking at it differently. And you see, for example, also global the conflict between Europe and the US, and approaches on a few things, the interactive and the legislations and the cooperation actually between the regions. So it's quite important to keep track on these information. Just as a additional reading, I would like to suggest to go to Meter. Meter is very well known actually for the Meter attack and the Meter defend frameworks, which is helping you to model, for example, cybersecurity and also information security and attacks, to find out actually how hackers are actually, which techniques they are using and how they are hacking. They also have a focus area on artificial intelligence, so it's giving you quite some interesting insights, free reading material that you can have a look at. And also I added the links also over here for ENISA. ENISA is the counterpart actually in Europe for the NIST in the US, so is the cybersecurity authority on an EU level, so you can actually have a look at it. And yeah, they also provide you with also reports, yearly reports, for example, also on cybersecurity threats. They provide you also with insights actually on the artificial intelligence regulations, so there are quite some interesting things you can collect actually from the information. If we are looking a bit on the framework, the security frameworks more specifically, and what the impact actually is first of all, except for the risk management, most of the frameworks are not focusing specifically actually on AI. Like for example, the ISO 27001 has been renewed since 2022. There is virtually no reference in the 27001 because it's mainly focusing on cloud security, data protection, and cybersecurity. But the good news here is that in essence, the combination of these frameworks can apply actually very simply to artificial intelligence, but because the high-level principles stay the same. You need to govern implementation, plan implementation, think about legislations, define rules and objectives. And one of the major disadvantages over here is that AI landscape is rapidly changing, so general framework will help if you consider the risks and if you think about implementations. Even nowadays, and for example, the hot topic nowadays is agentic AI. You see that even the speed of implementations is increasing. So keeping up with this new technology changes might be a bit of a pain in many cases, but in essence, if you apply the best practice, security best practice by principle, you can apply the security principles perfectly actually to artificial intelligence. One of the major changes which does apply actually to ISO 27001 or any other information security or data protection best practices is, of course, how to protect the data. What do you do with the enrichment of data, the collection of data? How do you expire or destroy the data? So it's quite a challenge actually to apply these rules. both from best practices, data protection and privacy best practice, as through legislations, and one of the most well-known legislations being challenging artificial intelligence is, of course, GDPR. Also, yeah, AI versus information security. The good news, certainly for the ISO 42000, it's pretty similar, and the structure is exactly the same as 27001. So you can perfectly combine the basic principles of AI governance with information security. So you don't always need to implement both standards, but I still would highly suggest to have a look at ISO 42000. You might find quite some interesting things in the references. In one of the next slides, certainly on guidance on skills and how to to define what you want to learn. I've used actually the 42000 as a sort of shopping list, and it references quite some interesting features and skills that you might need actually to handle AI. Right. Yeah, one of the topics also today was what's in demand on the skills. What do you want to know today? How do you handle AI? And just to spoil the story a bit, I used AI actually to ask that question. So I asked last night ChatGPT what are currently the top 10 most in demand AI skills, right? Have a look at it, because there might be some obvious suggestions over here, like for example machine learning. So how to learn how actually big data is being handled, and then how to detect, for example, patterns in that information. That's exactly what machine learning is doing. And of course, an advanced version of that one is deep learning and neural network expertise. Please be aware that many of these skills are not recent, meaning that neural networks and actually also programming, we'll discuss later on, in artificial intelligence, for example, are already techniques that exist since the late 60s, for example. So this is already there for quite a while. What is quite new is the way that nowadays large language models work. So it's quite an inventive way of working, but in essence, artificial intelligence principles are there already for quite a while. And therefore, a generative AI development, developing the platform, developing the systems, of course, is a very important job. And if you can handle that one, I think you have a very nice career for you ahead in that case. Then, of course, natural language processing. Watch out, NLP is here refer to natural language processing, not neuro-linguistic programming in that case, but actually how to handle and how to communicate actually with the large language model and to get the best information out of it. Also defining personas, how the engine should behave is a very important way of doing it. One important thing I already mentioned, point number 5, data engineering. Most of the AI systems, certainly large language models, need to have clean data, and this is quite a challenge because in most of the cases, of course, we are using human data, with including the errors and potential issues, or even bias, for example, in many cases. So human behavior is built in the data. So also the artificial intelligence might confront you actually in many cases also with negative behavior, because actually it's sitting and it's inherent in the data that's there. So having proper and quality data is extremely important actually to manage your AI. And of course, as we see nowadays more and more, is computer vision and using images, creating images is a very nice and feature. But as you probably know, also for data mapping and geographical mapping, having the recognition of data, geographic data, photos is quite important. And of course, managing the machine learning operations is quite an important one from an operational point of view. And of course, one of the critical things nowadays, I told you already, is also referenced to many best practices. How do you use AI ethically? How to make it responsible? And that's where also you must see that legislation, like for example the AI Act, will push you and make you accountable for fair use actually of your AI. Also, programming expertise, of course, using especially Python or any other framework. So the developer skills are quite important, and to tune, to configure, to develop actually the platforms. And of course, using the large language models, it is quite an important thing. What we all do almost all day nowadays. By the way, you will see I asked the same question just to check what Perplexity or another language model will do. So you see actually pretty much the same thing. The machine learning is there, computer vision is there, the data engineering and big data skills pretty slightly different actually mentioned, but also a very important what the Perplexity was mentioning over here is automation and agents. So agentic AI is over here, and also data analysis, data manipulation, and the business insights is a quite important feature or skill that you need to know to do so. In essence, I reversed the question a bit and to give you a bit more insight what you should learn for, and you see that actually the skills that are asked for nowadays are quite important, and that this might be very interesting. And if you want to take the next step in your career, think about AI, product management, architect skills, research and data scientists. Of course, machine learning is in there, and computer vision, but also prompt engineering and data scientist is an extremely important job. So if you have some background in data management, that can be very helpful and to boost your job actually for the future. Just a bit of a hint and to give you an idea actually where you can go to. Where can you look at? First of all, where do you come from? Where do you want to go? So you can't simply go a certain route in that case without ignoring where you come from. What is your background? It's quite important. So think about your general skills and educations. Do you have a university degree or mathematical, for example, or engineering is very helpful in many cases. It's not a roadblocker, but you probably will need to compensate if you don't have it, and keep learning actually in many cases. Also, what's your background in technology, or do you work already with AI models? And keep in mind, as I mentioned actually in the previous slides, also knowing and the way the pattern recognition works, the large language model works, the mathematical principles is a very powerful knowledge that you have actually to drive the adoption of AI. And of course, know how information security works, what is the protection of your data, how can you secure the data, how can you make sure that your system is robust, not being hacked, and to avoid malware or even ransomware attacks on your platforms, for example, is an extremely important part. And having some background in data protection, even legal, in many cases, can be very helpful actually to map your roadmap actually to future AI use and future AI skills in many cases. Very important, and which is the soft side actually, also a bit legal requirements, social skills, communication skills, language skills, or even economics. For example, please be aware that the power consumption, for example, also for many AI platforms is quite important. So there are quite some features that you should think about actually, or actually can go into also as a potential roadmap actually for your career. Where do you want to go? If you see at your education, please be aware that some of the core functions, engineering, mathematics, might be very useful, but due to the rapid evolvement actually of AI, don't hang up actually on your education. It's a helpful start, but in many cases you will see there's limited match actually with existing educations. On the other hand, if you're creative or think about outside the box and want to create or want to take action, eager to learn, actually you can go anyway. There is virtually on this short term no expert at anything in AI, so you can easily become the expert in many cases. Just as a hint, I took the 42,000, the ISO 42,000, a bit as a guide of learning, and just discussing a few topics that you will see. Thinking about AI policies and AI risk management, which is one of the important clauses, and considering where and how you want to implement AI might be important. One of the important things that during that risk assessment is also consider data protection, information security, or legal requirements. And so this is an important part of your PIA, privacy impact assessment, or data protection impact assessment. So AI need to be considered carefully. One important thing, of course, also referred to in the 27,000 or the 28,000 for supply chain, a very important part also for artificial intelligence, and of course, you want to make sure it works properly. So also consider going into audits, for example. One other thing, very important, HR and responsibilities, what is fair use, how to interact with people, and also very important, if you consider implementing AI within the company, you might also apply policies and rules, for example, how to report concerns, for example, sort of whistleblower function, if people are worried about AI, that they can report it, that you can act on it and work on it. Then, of course, tools for resources for AI tools, data, big data, cloud implementations, and very important also AI system lifecycle. We are very fresh in this area, but it's quite important to understand actually nothing is stable, and you need to renew the systems, you need to renew the data. So managing the AI system and their data in a life cycle is quite important. So typically using the plan to check act cycle for that one in ISO is a very common reference for that. And then, of course, as mentioned, data for AI, and also handling actually the expectations for users, customers, suppliers, for example, might be very important. And so communication skills or even the capability of having incident management might be an interesting way to go to do so, which is also one of the common factors that you might see in, for example, ISO 27. Good. If you want to go into learning, take a step back, look at it from a basic perspective, and get the basics first. Do some initial introduction. Make sure that you understand what the basic principles are. So do a bit of AI discovery, and then go explore. So try to use it, look into it, be aware and be cautious and things. And one of the things I can only reference over here, if you want to go into AI, is get out of your comfort zone. Try to use it and try to do something new, and you will probably learn a lot of interesting things to do so. Good. Where can you go for building some of your learning roadmap? First of all, check what is your areas of interest, and is it more governance on the architectural level, or the management level, or technology or development? So make sure that you know where you want to go to. And of course, one of the initial pointers to start with is the level of experience. And of course, as a sort of booster, depending on your educational background, you need to compensate for some skills you don't have, or you just have as a sort of strong point actually to move in certain areas. Right? Make a plan. Do you want to stay put in your function and to become a super expert in that function, or do you want to move forward into different functions, or do you want to move up? Becoming manager or an AI expert or an AI governance expert is quite an important thing. I discussed with this actually earlier on in the 15th edition from the PCB Insight magazine. So I will have provided the link over here. Have a look at it. Actually, it discusses a bit on creating the learning path. So it might be very interesting to do so and to look at the paths. This one was rather focused on information security, but you can apply perfectly the same rules to AI and artificial intelligence. And one of the links I added also over here was what Paul Jeremy did. So he mapped actually a few features in security, and actually depending on your areas of interest versus the level of experience you have, you might actually find quite some interesting education and trainings in that case. One of the starter points, of course, is PCB skills. So if you go to the pcb.com website and then click on the link on the skills website, you can actually discover what's available over there. There is quite some interesting starters material already available on the skills website. So introduction to AI and risk management. So there's an interesting part, and actually for a limited fee, actually you can actually get a lot of these modules, including also modules on information security or privacy, for example. So on the other hand, if you want to get some more global information on skills, for example, mapping cybersecurity, for example, have a look at the ENISA website, enisa.europe.eu, and if you look at the European Cybersecurity Skills Framework, also ECSF, you can actually find quite some hints and tips which role, which functionality you can map actually to these implementations. And last but not least, but this page is always too small. You can, of course, look at some vendors or platforms, for example, Microsoft or Google. Also, for example, LinkedIn has quite some interesting courses also for AI. And of course, depending on the open source, and then there's a lot of interesting things you can show. And I added a few other interesting things as PCB. What you will also provide a bit more information, so have a look at the information, so so the different ISO standards, and also I will make sure that actually you get the links in the LinkedIn page. That was it for the day. I hope that you had some interesting links actually to get started actually with AI and covering actually the information security part. Arjen, were there any questions in the chat?
Yes, we have a question. Can you see it?
I don't see it over here, Arjen. So can you read it out loud?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, which specific skills or certifications give professionals the strongest advantage when navigating AI and cybersecurity together?
Well, it depends a bit, as what I mentioned, on your technical background, but in that sense, I think combining the ISO 42000, at least the lead implementer, I think is a good start. The ISO overall is a bit of a general architecture or best practices framework, but it gives you quite some practical overview, and then based on the general skills, you might find the point of interest, and in that case, so combining that one, and certainly also as an add-on, and this is launched actually with the conference 2025 and PCB, is AI risk management. So the combination of governance, actually knowing actually what the overall system needs to do versus the potential risk of AI, is at least a good start actually to do so. And depending on your interest, depending on your background, depending on where you want to go, as I explained actually during the presentations, and you can move forward actually from that basic skill to get into the next steps. And that is what actually I also explained in the PCB Insights magazine.
We have time for another one.
Just a few minutes, Arjen.
Yeah. So another question is, won't every iteration of security frameworks built for AI go obsolete quickly, as AI is developing at a very rapid speed? This is a very interesting question, actually.
Yes, that's a potential risk, and yeah, this is one of the reasons, for example, that ISO rather keeps their frameworks in a general level, keeping the general principles, not going too much in detail. Even for the NIST AI risk management framework, which is by the US institution, yes, it's potential. We will only know like for the next 2 years. So the AI risk management framework is quite recent, but at least on technical level, it will move rapidly. And yes, absolutely. But in essence, for best practice, they more stay at the general level. The general principles will stay the same. You need to provide data protection, you need to secure your data, you need to fight against crime and malware in many cases, and that's what usually best practices do and certain international standards do by keeping on a high level and with applicable standards in many cases, of avoiding that level of details. Okay. Good.
Okay, I think we can conclude the session with that. So any questions the attendees might have, they can reach out directly to you on your LinkedIn forum. I would like to use this opportunity and thank you so much, Peter, for delivering this great presentation. I hope the audience enjoyed it, and I'll be talking to everyone very soon. So thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye.